RFPs is creating them the first to go around. Obviously, you'll have we can have, if this happens, we have to piggyback off from years to come and just change minor details. That's always the struggle, is creating one from scratch. That's unique to us.
Yeah, because we're one of the few districts that are still in house.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, so that was the RFP breakdown. We're going to jump into the budget side of stuff. So here's a high-level overview of what the budget has in it or doesn't have in it. So on the revenue side, right now, all numbers show and have a 0% tax increase from a local level. They have a $200,000 increase for earned income tax. And just recently, I did a $150,000 decrease in interest based off of the environment, how the Fed's been, I guess, signaling how the next year is going to look, plus our use of fund balance towards the project for contractor payments. So that's kind of bringing that down from last year. So this is a budget-to-budget comparison. So last year we had we're going to bring that down about $150,000. So this is a change. That's why it's highlighted from the last month when I presented. That is a change on that side. State, as always, we do static for state. Right now we have no news on Homestead Farmstead. This generally comes out late April, early May. So next month I'll have information.
You've already been paying contractors off the 6 point that we moved? Is that what you just said?
No, no. What happens is over the course of the next year, we'll maybe exhaust all of our debt service funds. So right now we took funds and we have some in a bank account that are just debt service. When they exhaust, we will then go into that 6.1 million. That'll happen sometime next year. I don't know when exactly it'll run out because the payments vary month to month. But when that does, we'll be exhausting funds, so we'll have less fund balance to then invest, to then recoup investment income.
We're not moving the whole 6 million. We're moving it as needed.
Correct, but just the signaling of what interest rates will potentially look like next year aren't as positive as what they did. So that's something that I constantly address, trying to figure out. So that's just me forecasting that next year we're going to have.
Any idea how much we're going to pay out on the construction costs through that next year?
We won't know, because a lot of that's part of the.
When will we?
So a lot of that we won't know. Yeah, I was going to say. Till it's over, because a lot of it's based off of contingency funds, and we won't know how many change orders we will have until the end. Obviously, when we get to a certain point, we'll have a better idea, but at this point, we're in the thick of the 60s wing, which is the oldest part of the building.
Probably where we'll spend some next year. Okay.
So that I can't answer at this time.
Okay.
How much did we set aside for contingency?
I believe, well, it's on the last slide here, so just shy of that 1.8 million. So we're at just under 540,000, so 30% has been used. Yes, so far.
So that 1.8 in theory is within that 6.1. So the more of that.
Correct. There's some other things. So obviously we have some commissioning and some things that we don't know. We have a budget number in there for it. If they come in more favorable from the actual, just like this budget, we will see some savings. We just won't know until those.
Right. Until it actually goes up.
Yes.
And we're at what, 30% use?
Correct. We're just at the 30%.
We see.
Yeah, we'll see the slides always at the end there when we go through the change orders. So that's the change for the interest earning state didn't change. Like I said, Homestead Farm, so will come out in May. I'll look at that. So we'll figure out if the state authorizes that, because that's something they do have to do prior to them approving a state budget. They'll tell us how much is allocated for Homestead Farm State.
That's cool.
Federal money is no change to Title I, II, or IV. It's pretty much at a normal pace for those. On the expense side, we have our contractual obligations for salaries and benefits. So teachers and administrators are, with the contracts that were approved last year, at 3.1% increase. Support staff is at 3.6%. Healthcare, dental, and vision, we actually just met today. That 10% looks like it's going to hold, which is actually pretty decent news that it's not going up above that. And PSERS was locked in, like I said, at 34% for next year. Some of the other highlights that are impacting, we talked about cyber charter school, that 450. This is above last year's budgeted numbers. And the same thing with our principal and interest payments for debt service. This is like the last major ramp up of 185. this reviews for your prior actuals against the two current budget and future budget. We went down through this, so the big highlight would be that we changed the investment earnings and some of the calculations of Social Security and PSERS based off of the priorities we did or did not push through last month. And that's the biggest change. And you can see budget to budget is a 3.4% increase. So 25-26 comparative to 24-25 is a 3.4% increase on our revenue at this point in time. Any questions then on revenue? And we'll just, I'm going to kind of breeze through the next couple slides unless the committee has some questions on it. It kind of just breaks down what we just reviewed over the past couple slides.
So for the current year that we're in now, and we budgeted 39 million in revenues, isn't that kind of showing to be low?
So if you're, I guess I'm assuming you're comparing from 22-23 and 23-24.
But if you look at the actuals we've gotten now, and what we normally get in
So,
April, May, June, March, April, May, June, didn't we under budget a little? We were very conservative.
So I'll say the biggest change is we do no longer have ESSER funding. We use quite a bit of ESSER funding to supplant, which resulted in having additional revenues. So if you can see, we are really nothing that's out of the ordinary and highly budgeted except for federal funds was 1.7 million, 1.16, and it drops down to 400. So that's 600,000. Obviously, some state funds budgeted versus actual change because whenever the state approves their budget, we end up getting more than budgeted if they increase, and typically we have. And the past 2 years, and even including this year, we've had significant educational increases.
Because it just seemed like looking at the other information that you requested review, that we always typically are very conservative revenue, and it's always a lot more than what we're budgeting.
So the budget, the way I would say typical school districts, we're not different in that, is you budget where you believe the revenues will be as a floor. Because that's the worst case scenario, and the same thing with expenses. You budget those as the ceiling, and that gap is the deficit. What happens is that all could come true. We don't know. We're budgeting a year ahead of time.
Historically, it's never come true. It's always been significantly more
And I guess
than
the
what we budgeted.
I guess the argument is, what prediction do we use that says it's guaranteed to continue? That's the struggle with my job, to project a year in advance. Because I'm going to be looked at if I go too high, I'm going to be looked at if I go too low. Where is the happy medium? And there is no right answer, at least from where I sit, that says I can predict how much I can put in.
I understand that, but when we historically are showing that it's very conservative and it's always ends up, the actuals always end up being more, we're basing tax increases on information that isn't 100% correct.
I would say we usually base the tax increases on the needs of here. We don't solely address the deficit, we address what the needs are of what we're seeing as that trend. And that's why we have these 4-year trends, and you can see where we're short or where we're not short on those aspects.
So it's very fluid and we don't have any real answers. When, just a question, Tom, when are we required by law to have our budget approved and finalized?
You don't know that, Tim?
The technical answer would be June 30th.
Well, yeah.
So when-
Before the state is the point.
Yeah.
Right.
The state's technical answer is June 30th.
They want the revenue before the state says any kind of commitment.
So that's the struggle,
Yeah,
is
we
to be able to.
understand that. I'm saying, historically, we can see that we're very conservative when we budget our revenues. And that's why we had a huge surplus that surfaced finally. So I can't wait to see how this year's actual turns out.
I wouldn't, see, I have a problem with the whole huge surplus, because we were making cuts too, to create that surplus. The middle school went without a principal, would have had one principal for 3 years.
And
We cut that other position so we could save money when we went into building. I mean, we did things, we went without so we would have that extra money when we did come to the end of a construction, because we knew that Chris wasn't gonna take out as much.
So you guys are talking historical pre-board stuff, so
Well, right, but what I'm saying is, we're not just crazy, just taxing
No,
people.
I'm
I
not
mean,
saying
that's not
that, I'm
what we're-
saying, to me, it just seems like, we're very conservative in our revenue here.
I would just say the surplus that we have seen the past 2 years is A, from ESSER funding, and B, because we did not have debt service payments, but the tax raises were in preparation of those. So now and today, we have those. If you can look at, when we get to, I can jump forward to the expense side, a few slides down, since we're on the topic, is if you look at debt service here, we went from 900 to 2.9. We prepared the revenues at a $2.9 million level, but we didn't have that. We had them at 1.18, 1.6. So somewhere there's going to be a difference because we ramped up the revenues to match the same fashion we're doing ACTI. We're ramping them up. At one point in time, that when that expense comes due, we're going to be thankful we have that ramped up.
Thank you for bringing that up.
So that's where we're at today. So we had those few years of no expense, but the revenue was there. And now we're in that scenario where the expense has caught up, the revenue is not there to use as a surplus.
So I heard a couple things in there. First, what I heard was ESSER funds allowed us to save money and bank money. The second part of that is, as we're preparing the funds for our new debt service once the building's built, that money goes into, that comes out as a surplus. All of those things combined with increasingly high interest rates that we saw for a few years that we hadn't had before, kind of make a perfect storm to be able to have surpluses that we've had the past couple of years, which the surpluses will not be what they were due to those factors that we've just talked about. That's what I heard. Is that correct?
I think it's more than a couple of years, but
I would say the past 2 years are atypical of what we would have. Even I would say that what we would expect at any point in time. They were just unknown when this came out to begin with. Other than we had a debt service and we needed that for this day, that we have 185,000 left to ramp up.
But it's every year that we end up with a surplus and projected. And
I would say you'd be hard pressed to find any school district that does a budget that ends up pushing themselves to save on expenses to end with a surplus across the state. And if they are, then the state intervenes because they are not doing their financial due diligence.
Okay.
It's just
Yeah.
the education and how the education system budgets and operates.
It's a very complex problem that is often viewed in a simplistic format.
So I guess, do we have any questions? We can run down through, is there any questions on the revenue side? We'll go through some expenses then too. I have the breakdown in the next few slides. I'm not gonna go talk through all the numbers. If you have any questions on that, line by line, we can go through, but those are just, the 6,000s are local, 7,000s are state, 8,000s are federal, and 9,000s are other. So these are when we paid out of, you can see the GO bonds at the top, that was when we paid out of general fund to reimburse ourselves back with GO bond funds. And then some insurance claims at the bottom. So anything with a high end is insurance claim that we had to claim here in the district and receipt. Obviously we had to expense that, so it was a one-for-one, but we have to show those. Any questions, I guess? Go too fast, there's a lot of information on those slides. Go line by line. Hearing none, we'll continue on. Expenses. Like I said, the expenses, this high level view, the only change was pulling out those few items we talked about from last meeting. So the TA and the emotional support class stayed. I believe the secondary admin assistant is gone or cut from the budget. And I believe it was some supplies that were cut from the budget. And then the last voting session, I took out what we were allocating towards Chromebook cycle. So those are the major changes. Like I said, at 6.1, I'm not factoring in this calculation because it's going to be a transfer as is, as be shown for a PDE standard, but I don't want to show that we're having $48 million worth of expenses when that's not true. We're going to have that 6.1 of expense, but that's in a fund balance perspective. So budget to budget, if we're comparing, is a 5.1% increase. We talked about why that 5.1% has kind of been there the last month. So I guess any questions on the expense? It's broken down line by line with the next couple slides as well. So 100s are salaries, benefits are 200s, 300s are professional services, 400s are property services, 500s are usually tuition and transportation and insurance. 600s are supplies, or what is deemed supplies is some other accounts in there, and 700s is equipment, and 800s any dues and fees, and 900 is solely principals and transfers. So this would be exactly what the committee received last month, other than those few changes that I discussed.
Any thoughts?
I guess any questions there on expenses? We can always go back if there are some. So now into the fun conversation of the night, looking at a budget as the whole. So last year we had a $1.35 million deficit. This year, right now, as we sit today, we have just shy of $2.1 million. So here at administration, we're recommending 1% for ACTIs. Is something we've planned out last year. We're continuing to push for that 1% for ACTI because we know that's coming. Date to be determined, but it'll be here at some point in time.
How much is 1% here?
180,000 on the revenue side. We are also recommending anywhere from a 1% to a 2% to address operations. So those bullet points below are what operations we are looking to support with the 1 to 2% tax increase. So really, Dr. Moses said plenty of times, recruit, retain quality staff, enhance and improve our current programming. As I mentioned last time, we have inflation. We want to try to use a little bit of that to keep pace with inflation. And the last bullet point will go into the next slide, which is maintaining a healthy fund balance. So I don't know if there's any discussions here around this tax increase, or if we want to pause that for the time being and then come back.
Can we pause that for the time being and come back? Or
Yep.
would you all like to say something now? You can just come back after we get through? Yeah, can you come back to that?
Okay, so this next slide is to kind of address the healthy fund balance. So this is the slide. I can zoom in here for the crowd. You can see. So if it wants me to,
I don't know that you can.
there it goes. Nighttime there. So we can see, we'll just kind of explain. The left-hand side is the description. The kind of teal-green color is our capital reserve fund balance. And then the blue, the next one before the black line, is our total general fund, both assigned and unassigned. And to the right of the black line is the broken down buckets of that assigned and unassigned. So I did a 3-year kind of projection on things that we talked about here at a board level. So at the top, you can see where we ended with the audit, this first yellow line, where we ended with the audit as of June 30th, 2024. So this is what the audit kind of updated us on. The $358,000 here in capital projects is what the Finance Committee recommended and the full board approved in October. The 1.352 is what the board approved as a deficit. So right now that's all information we have to go on until we finalize the year. So that's just shown there as showing a deficit of what was approved. So the next is, let's look forward. Okay, so what's going to happen in 2026, 2027, 2028? So on the 10-year plan, we have roughly about $250,000 in capital projects that aren't included in the facility grant and or athletics. So that's kind of just a placeholder that says we are going to approve all those $250,000. Facility grant activity, that's the blue gym, the windows, and the pneumatics of what the board has said they are going to, scope of work they're going to proceed with. That number is based off of estimations, that will be changed during bid day. The same thing with athletics, the highlight is 700,000, that's a rough estimate of baseball and softball upgrades, of what the board kind of looked at with the softball reorientation. I also have the projected land sale, if that would ever go through, in the next year. We also have the $2.98 million deficit that I projected here tonight. And then we have the $6.1 million, worst case scenario, we use it all, being coming out of fund balance and paying the contractors to complete the job. So that $6.1 million, we're gonna say that's all of it spent for this projection. And it's showing that at the end of 2026, we would have just shy of 2.3 million in our general fund balance. And 3.5 million in our capital reserve. And then we're gonna project forward again with ACES. I don't have a budget projection here from a general fund perspective, so we're going to leave that blank. But you can notice that the unassigned fund balance is at a negative. And then ACES, the 1.5 here to do the units, and I believe that's it. I think we mixed the recoding for the moment. The same thing with capital projects, 250,000 is kind of what the earmark is for the next several years. And then the athletic upgrade, the track is slated to be in 2028. So you can see we went from a nice healthy fund balance of general fund and capital reserve, so 11.8 million in general fund and just shy of 6.5 million in capital reserve. And in 3 years' time, we will be down to 850,000 in capital reserve and 2.3 million if we had no general fund deficits on the general fund. So that's why the request of operations keep a healthy fund balance, because if we don't do little over time, this will cascade into the future stronger and harder every year. So we have a lot of fund balance, and we build it up for a purpose. Those purposes are going to be coming due here in the next few months, or next few years. So at some point in time, we're going to need to get that back to a healthy level to start doing more future projects in that future time frame.
Maybe you could remind us on some of the funding that's coming in for some of these projects that we're depending on, so it's not impacting.
Yeah, so the athletics, the baseball and softball, we were trying to use the land sale, both land sales, to offset that purchase for baseball, softball, and the scoreboard. And then we got a $500,000 supporting grant from the state for the blue, or for the high school portion, blue gym, windows, and pneumatics, and $500,000 for ACES. So got $1 million total from the state. The biggest kicker is just the $6.1 million we've been setting aside in the course of ramping up those fund balances and surpluses to use towards the project. That's coming due, and that's a large chunk of our general fund balance going to be gone. Now, if there's less than that gone, that's obviously beneficial, but I'm anticipating that we're going to use all of it, at least at this point.
Yeah, in the fall, when we agreed to using the surplus for certain items, you said, if we don't use it for this, we're gonna have to raise taxes in the future to pay for this stuff. So now it's,
So these projects, so you're addressing the capital projects, these projects are on the 10-year plan. We are fortunate enough to get $1 million from the state. If we miss out on that,
I'm not saying don't do it, I'm saying,
yes, correct, because at some point in time, these will become district expenses, regardless if you do them now or later.
right, it just seems like we agree that, okay, we'll use it for this, and the next thing you know, it's like, oh, well, we need more money, and we need to raise taxes again. It's, all I'm saying.
I don't think you're ever gonna get out of the cyclical
well,
nature of
obviously
raising
not, but,
taxes.
you know, we were told, use this, and then,
But at this point in time, we haven't done any of these projects.
I get it.
It's looking, projecting forward, if we do what we say we're gonna do at the cost that we're projecting, then this is where the outlook. This is something most business managers always try to provide the board that says, here's what the next few years will look like if we do everything we're saying we're gonna do. We're doing a lot here in the district, and we're improving a lot.
all at the same time.
In a very scheduled way, in a very scheduled way.
So we plan, the plan is working according to that plan. It's just that when we're done the plan, we're gonna be looking to build back up to get to the next plan. So do we want to start that now, or do we want to wait and do it for the next several years to try to continue that forward? I'm rather do it now and a little over time. That's how I plan these budgets to present to the board. If the board changes and says we'd rather have a wait and see option, then that is something that I'll change.
This is also with the $1.3 billion budget deficit from
Yep.
last year, which
Yep.
most likely is not going to be the case.
And we will change these numbers when that number changes. So I don't put these numbers in front of the board until I get the audited numbers. So at this point in time, we only have that deficit
We
number.
know what the increase in funding that we got from the state was, right?
Which is reflective in that 2.9 million, which is in the BIS budget. So we take what the increase the state gave us this current year and put it in next year's budget. And that's what we budget off of. And then the same thing will happen next year. So any increase we receive here in 25
But
and
that
26.
increase isn't reflected in the 1.3 million on this fund balance.
Correct.
So that's already, we know that's better than.
So we received about 800-ish thousand, I think between 800 and 850,000.
So that makes
Not,
that.
not only that, but we're building houses, we're gonna get more revenue that way. I mean, we're not as bad as we think.
I'm just projecting out. I'm not saying we're in a good or bad spot. I'm just saying this is where we will be at 2020 with the information we have today.
We do projections, right? Like when a housing development goes in, you got 500 houses. Now, it'll probably take 5 years or 7 years or whatever it is.
We have Mayberry that's,
Mayberry.
That's 500?
I think it's 200, I believe. I think it was originally 500 and I think it changed. So closer to 200. And it's also across 20 years.
Yeah. That's gonna take, hey, any indication of the action of this speech for the use federal funding?
At this point in time, everything I'm reading is there's going to be little to no impact here at a local level.
Okay.
Now, whether that happens at a state and they have to change their operations,
Okay.
we are seeing that until further notice, we're just.
You think it's gonna be there?
Yeah, again, yeah, we don't know because, from the state government.
My point
go ahead.
would be that we're gonna be looking at these projects and making decisions on them year to year. We're gonna be building our budget year to year. I don't think that we should use these hypothetical fund balances several years out to scare the board into tax increase.
I think a better thing to do is to push out these things that you wanna do.
Absolutely, that's why I
Like,
say year to year,
yeah.
if we wanna decide not to do these,
The
we
athletic
decide not to
fields,
do them.
they're done. Athletic upgrade, we should cancel our meeting.
Correct, I think 95% of our campus will be new.
Right.
At the completion of the athletic fields.
Oh.
And newer campuses,
That'd be
newer
awesome.
buildings, all
Yeah.
cost less in maintenance, less in energy use.
Right.
And less in a number of things. So it's a confluence of events that gets us to a spot where we're here with all of the projects that we have, with the money that we have, and the situation that we're in. I think what I asked Mr. Schobaker to do is just to simply share what it looks like moving forward if we focus on trying to maintain 0% or use money
But
from
that
our
was
fund
the surplus
balance.
money that we agreed to use.
Use money from our fund balance to be able to pay for things that are recurring on an annual basis. And I think this gives a really good projection for that.
To Jeannie's point, I think that we're being hit both ways. I feel like when we get the surplus in, we say, we've got all this money that we can put towards a project to do, and we give the thumbs up,
We're
yep,
gonna
it's not
raise
gonna
taxes
improve,
'cause you're
and we
gonna
don't have
use
to
the
raise
surplus.
taxes because of it. And now, you have to raise taxes because we're gonna use surplus money to, it just.
I get and understand that you